The air tasted of copper and pulverized concrete. A fine, gritty dust, kicked up by the relentless staccato of machine gun fire, settled on Sergeant Anya Sharma's eyelids and coated the back of her throat. She lay prone behind the meager cover of a shattered cinderblock wall, her fingers pressing firmly against the femoral artery of Private Miller. The kid was pale, his eyes wide with shock, his breathing a shallow, ragged whisper. The round had torn through his thigh, a messy, catastrophic wound that was stealing his life one crimson pulse at a time. Around them, the rest of 1st Platoon, Kilo Company, was hopelessly pinned down in the skeletal remains of what had once been a market square. The enemy fire was disciplined, accurate, and coming from multiple elevated positions. But one rifle, in particular, was doing the most damage. Its report was a deep, distinctive crack that echoed off the crumbling facades a split second before another Marine crumpled to the ground. A Dragunov, a very skilled marksman, was methodically dismantling them. "Stay with me, Miller," Anya murmured, her voice a low, calm current in the roaring river of combat. She didn't look at his face. Her focus was on her hands, on the pressure, on the quick clot gauze she was feeding into the wound. Her medical pack, usually a source of order and control, felt woefully inadequate against the sheer violence of the day. "Pressure on this. Press hard. Don't let go." She guided his own trembling hand to the bandage, forcing his fingers to grip it. Her movements were economical, devoid of panic. She had seen worse. But the tactical situation was deteriorating with every passing second. The platoon was caught in a perfectly constructed L-shaped ambush. The sniper had them locked down from the south, from the crumbling minaret of a mosque, while at least 2 machine gun nests raked the street from the east. They couldn't advance and they couldn't retreat. They could only bleed. First Sergeant Riggs, a man whose face seemed permanently carved from granite and fury, crawled over to her position, kicking up a cloud of debris. "What's his status, Doc?" He yelled over the din. "He's stabilized for now. But he needs a bird." "We all do," Anya replied, her gaze already scanning the rooftops, her mind deconstructing the geometry of the kill box. She saw it instantly. The subtle heat shimmer near the top of the minaret, the way the shadows played, the logical fields of fire. The shooters in the minaret. Top floor, second window from the left. The machine guns are in that 2-story building. They're using the murder holes. We're being dissected. She delivered the information flatly. A statement of fact, not a suggestion. Riggs spared her a venomous glance, his frustration and fear manifesting as pure contempt. "I don't need a tactical assessment from the medic," he snarled, his voice a rasp of gravel and tobacco. "Worry about your bandages, Sharma. Leave the shooting to the grunts." He turned away, screaming into his comms, trying to coordinate a response that was futile. Suppressive fire was a waste of ammunition. The enemy was too well dug in. Any attempt to move drew an immediate, lethal response from the sniper. The first sergeant's dismissal stung, but it was a familiar sensation. In a world of chest-thumping bravado, her quiet competence was often mistaken for meekness. She was the doc, a support role, a non-combatant in the eyes of men like Riggs who saw the world through the simple lens of a rifle sight. She was there to patch them up, not to think. Her opinion on enemy disposition was as welcome as a fox in a henhouse. A young private, Evans, huddled nearby, his rifle trembling in his hands. He'd heard the exchange, and he shot her a look of pity. Anya ignored it. She finished securing the bandage on Miller's leg with practiced efficiency, her fingers moving with the certainty of a master craftsman. She gave the boy a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder, her eyes conveying a calm she did not entirely feel. The situation was not just bad. It was on the verge of collapsing entirely. Another sharp crack echoed from the minaret, and Corporal Jensen, the man next to Evans, screamed as a 762 by 54 mm round punched through the wall he was using for cover, spraying his face with stone fragments and peppering his side with shrapnel. Anya was already moving before the scream died in his throat, a low crawl through the dust and spent casings. The scorn from Riggs was irrelevant. The bullets were not. The sniper was patient, methodical. He wasn't shooting to suppress, he was shooting to kill. And he was succeeding. Each crack of his rifle was another tick of the clock, counting down the remaining lives of 1st Platoon. Riggs could dismiss her all he wanted, but the geometry of the battlefield was an unforgiving truth, and right now, it was a truth that was burying them alive. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that if someone didn't change the equation, no one was walking out of this square. Another bullet snapped past, this one so close she felt the air compress against her cheek. It struck Corporal Davies, the platoon's designated marksman, with a sickening wet thud. The round hit him high in the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him against the rubble. His M110 rifle, a beautiful and deadly piece of semi-automatic precision, clattered to the ground beside him. He cried out, a sharp intake of breath followed by a groan of pure agony. Anya was at his side in a heartbeat, ignoring the renewed hail of fire his fall had drawn. Easy, Davies. Let me see, she said, her voice steady. She cut away his flak jacket's shoulder strap and the sleeve of his uniform. The entry wound was clean, but the exit had taken a chunk of muscle and bone with it. He was out of the fight definitively. As she worked, applying a chest seal and starting a line, her eyes kept straying to the rifle lying in the dust. It was a finely tuned instrument, topped with a Leupold Mark IV scope. A tool for solving a very specific kind of problem. The problem currently killing them. After stabilizing Davies and getting him to drink some water, a profound and dangerous calm settled over her. The cacophony of the firefight seemed to fade into a dull background hum. The shouts of men, the crackle of the radio, the roar of machine guns. It all became white noise. The only thing that felt real was the rifle. First Sergeant Riggs, seeing Davies go down, let out a string of curses that could peel paint. We've lost our overwatch. We're blind, he yelled into the handset. Anya finished wrapping Davies' shoulder. She looked at the wounded man, then at the terrified face of Private Evans, then back at the rifle. Without a word, she reached for it. Her fingers wrapped around the familiar cold steel of the handguard. The weight felt right, felt like coming home. Riggs saw the movement out of the corner of his eye. Sharma, what in the hell do you think you're doing? Get back to the casualties, he bellowed. Anya didn't look at him. Her focus was entirely on the weapon. She racked the charging handle, ejecting the chambered round and inspecting it before smoothly letting the bolt fly home, chambering a fresh one. Her movements were fluid, economical, and imbued with a level of familiarity that was utterly out of place for a medic. She checked the magazine, feeling the heft of the 20 rounds of 762mm NATO. She adjusted the stock, pressing it against her shoulder, feeling for the perfect length of pull. Riggs took a step toward her, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. I gave you an order, Sergeant. But he stopped. Something in her posture, in the absolute certainty of her actions, gave him pause. It wasn't insubordination. It was purpose. Tied to the rifle sling was a small, intricately woven charm made of dried rhododendron flowers. Its colors faded from years of sun and dust. It was a detail no one else would notice, but to her it was everything. A memory of her grandfather, a Gurkha scout sniper, his hands guiding hers on the stock of an old Lienfield in the hills of Nepal. The wind makes no sound of its own, he had told her, his voice a quiet rasp. It only sings when it touches something. You must learn to hear its song in the grass, in the leaves, in the dust. She looked through the scope, her eyes settling into the familiar circle of magnified reality. The world snapped into focus. The chaos of the battle was gone, replaced by the cold, clear logic of ballistics. She was no longer Sergeant Sharma, the medic. She was the Spectre's granddaughter. The suppressive fire from the rest of the platoon was sporadic and desperate, a nervous drumbeat against the enemy's confident rhythm. It wouldn't be enough to cover a frontal assault, but it was enough to cover a ghost. Anya took a deep, slow breath, calming the adrenaline that threatened to tremble her hands. She needed to move. This position was compromised, the angle to the minaret obscured by the shifting dust and the wreckage of a burned-out truck. She needed height. She needed a clearer song from the wind. Her eyes scanned the ruins around her, not as a medic looking for casualties, but as a hunter seeking a perch. She saw it, a 3-story shell of a building on the western edge of the square. Its facade was gone, blown away by some long-forgotten airstrike, leaving its concrete floors exposed like layers in a geological survey. The 3rd floor offered a commanding view of the entire area, including a perfect, unobstructed line of sight to the minaret and the machine gun nests. Getting there would be suicide for anyone else. The open ground between her current position and the building was a 30-meter stretch of death. But Anya didn't see it that way. She saw a tapestry of cover and concealment, a shadow cast by a broken wall, a dip in the terrain no deeper than a foot, a momentary cloud of dust kicked up by a ricochet. These were the notes in the wind's song. "Evans," she said, her voice low and clear, cutting through his fear. "When I move, put 3 rounds into the 2nd-floor window of that eastern building. Don't aim to hit anything. Just make them look." The young private stared at her, his mouth agape, but he saw the unshakable certainty in her eyes and nodded dumbly. Anya didn't wait for confirmation. She watched the rhythm of the battle, the ebb and flow of incoming fire. There was a lull barely 2 seconds long between the bursts from the primary machine gun. It was a tiny window of opportunity. She exhaled completely, making herself small. "Now," she whispered. As Evans fired his 3 rounds, a clumsy but distracting volley, Anya moved. She did not run. She flowed. It was a movement born of a lifetime of practice, a predator's crawl that was less a physical action and more a surrender to the landscape. She stayed so low to the ground she seemed to merge with it, the M110 held tight to her body. Dust and debris rained down around her, but she moved through it as if it were a gentle fog. She reached the base of the ruined building and didn't pause. The ascent was a vertical climb, using exposed rebar and shattered concrete as handholds. Her pack, lighter without some of the medical gear she'd used, didn't encumber her. She moved with the silent, deliberate grace of a mountain goat, her boots finding purchase on surfaces that looked impossibly slick. Each movement was considered precise. She tested every hold before putting her weight on it, her body a single coiled muscle of intent. The groans of stressed metal and the scrape of her boots on concrete were swallowed by the gunfire. To the observers below, both friend and foe, she had simply vanished. She had been behind one wall and then she was gone. Riggs, who had been about to scream at her again, lowered his rifle, his eyes scanning the space where she had been. He saw nothing. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. Up on the 3rd floor, Anya pulled herself over the final ledge, her breathing controlled, her heart a steady drum. She crawled across the debris-strewn floor, staying well back from the edge, a phantom in the shadows. The wind was stronger up here, a steady, warm current flowing from west to east. It sang to her, whispering secrets of trajectory and drift. She found her spot, a nest of broken concrete that offered both concealment and a stable platform. She gently deployed the rifle's bipod, the metallic click barely audible. The world below was laid out before her like a map. She was no longer in the kill box. She was above it. The world shrank to the circular view of the Leupold scope. Through the glass, the distant minaret, nearly a kilometer away, seemed close enough to touch. The heat shimmer rising from the baked earth created a mirage, making the target dance and waver. A novice would be deceived by it, would compensate incorrectly and send a round harmlessly into the sky or the dirt. Anya saw through it. She saw the truth of the air itself. Her mind became a silent, organic ballistics computer. Distance: approximately 950 meters. Wind: steady, 10 miles per hour, full value from her right. Temperature: 38 degrees Celsius. Humidity: negligible. Uphill angle roughly 5 degrees. Each variable was a number, an input into a complex equation she had been solving since she was a child. She wasn't just guessing. She was calculating. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The rifle is honest. It sends the bullet where you tell it. But the world between you and the target is a liar. The wind, the heat, the gravity, they all lie. You must know their language to hear the truth. She adjusted the elevation turret on the scope. The clicks were crisp, precise. 36 clicks up for the drop. She held her reticle steady, then moved it left, into the empty air beside the minaret. The windage adjustment was not a matter of clicks, but of instinct, of feel. She had to hold for the wind, a mental calculation that was more art than science. Her breathing slowed. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6. On the pause after the exhale, when her body was perfectly still, her heart rate at its lowest ebb between beats, that was the moment of truth. Through the scope, she saw it. A flicker of movement in the target window. Not the sniper himself, but the barrel of his Dragunov as he shifted position. A sliver of dark metal against the shadowed interior. It was all she needed. She saw more than the rifle. She saw the man behind it. She pictured his posture, the way he would be leaning, the position of his head relative to his own scope. The world was not a liar to her. It was a textbook. Her finger rested on the trigger, feeling the slight take-up of the two-stage mechanism. She applied steady pressure, not pulling, but squeezing, becoming one with the machine. The crosshairs were steady, holding a space that appeared to be empty, a full body width to the left of the window. The platoon below continued its desperate, ineffective firing. In the TOC, miles away, a colonel leaned over a monitor watching the drone feed. "They're getting butchered," he said grimly. "Where is Kilo's counter-sniper?" "Davies is down, sir," an analyst replied. Anya's world consisted only of the reticle, the wind, and her breath. She exhaled. The world fell silent. She squeezed. The M110 bucked against her shoulder, a firm, familiar push. The sound of the shot was a sharp crack, instantly lost in the general din of battle. For a moment, nothing happened. A full second and a half passed as the 175-grain bullet traveled across the square, spinning at thousands of revolutions per second, fighting the lies of the wind and the pull of the earth. Then, through the scope, Anya saw the result. A pink mist erupted from the sniper's window in the minaret, followed a split second later by the Dragunov rifle tumbling out and falling to the street below. The distinctive, terrifying crack that had terrorized 1st Platoon was silenced. A stunned quiet fell over the radio net. Below, 1st Sergeant Riggs stared at the minaret, his mouth hanging open. The incessant, deadly fire that had pinned them for the last hour had simply stopped. He looked around wildly, searching for the source. His eyes drifted up to the ruined building where he'd last seen the medic. He saw nothing, just shadows and silence. The sudden absence of the sniper's rifle sent a wave of confusion through the enemy fighters. Their linchpin was gone. For a few precious seconds, their rate of fire slackened as they tried to understand what had just happened. But the silence was short-lived. Realizing they were now facing a skilled marksman of their own, the enemy's panic morphed into focused rage. They knew, with chilling accuracy, the general location the shot must have come from. The 2 machine guns in the eastern building pivoted, their heavy barrels traversing toward the 3-story ruin where Anya was hidden. A storm of lead erupted, chewing into the concrete facade of her perch. Chunks of stone the size of fists exploded inward, and a hailstorm of shrapnel and dust filled the air. Anya had already moved. The moment she confirmed the hit, she had slid backward from her position, crawling deeper into the shadows of the ruined floor. A hunter never stays in the same hide twice. The spot where she had been lying just seconds before was obliterated by a torrent of 762mm rounds that would have torn her in half. The building groaned under the assault. Rebar screamed as it was bent and torn. Concrete dust became a thick, choking fog, reducing visibility to near zero. An RPG streaked across the square and slammed into the floor below her, the explosion shaking the entire structure to its foundations. The floor beneath her feet shuddered and cracked. She was no longer the hunter. She was the hunted. Down on the street, Riggs watched in horror. The fury being directed at that building was apocalyptic. He had sent men to their deaths with his arrogance. He had dismissed the one person who understood the battlefield and, in doing so, had trapped her in a concrete tomb. Guilt and a new, terrifying respect warred within him. "Covering fire!" he roared, his voice cracking with urgency. "Pour it on that eastern building. Everything you've got." The platoon, galvanized by his command and the sudden hope the sniper's death had given them, responded instantly. They unleashed a desperate, concentrated volley of fire at the machine gun nests. It wasn't particularly accurate, but the sheer volume forced the enemy gunners to duck, momentarily relieving the pressure on Anya's position. In the TOC, the colonel was on his feet, pointing at the screen. "Get me eyes inside that building. Can the drone get a look?" "Negative, sir, the roof is intact. We have no visual on the shooter." "Then who the hell took that shot?" the colonel demanded. The analyst's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Still trying to confirm, sir. Kilo's designated marksman is down. No other scoped rifles are in that platoon's inventory." The colonel stared at the screen, at the ruined building being systematically torn apart. Someone was in there. Someone who had made a 1 in 1,000 shot and was now paying the price. Anya, covered in a thick layer of gray dust, lay still, letting the building absorb the punishment. She listened. She felt the vibrations through the floor. She cataloged the enemy's firing patterns. They were angry. They were undisciplined. They were exposing themselves. The RPG blast had opened a new hole in the floor, giving her an unexpected vantage point downward, a narrow slit through which she could see a sliver of the street below. The enemy thought they had her trapped. They thought she was cowering. They were wrong. She was reloading. She was listening to the wind. She was waiting. The enemy, emboldened by the lack of return fire, made a critical mistake. Believing the mysterious sniper to be dead or suppressed, a fire team of 5 insurgents broke from cover, attempting to flank the platoon's position by moving up the western alley. They moved in a practiced wedge, using the rubble for cover, their confidence renewed. One carried a PKM machine gun, its long ammo belt glinting in the sun. He was the priority. From his new position, peering through the jagged hole in the floor, Anya saw them. They were moving quickly, but to her, in the compressed reality of the scope, they seemed to be moving in slow motion. Her mind processed the new firing solution instantly. The angle was steep, the targets moving laterally. It required leading them, anticipating their steps. A complex series of shots that would have to be perfect. She couldn't afford a miss. A single miss would reveal her new position and bring the full weight of the enemy's firepower down on her again. She settled the M110, the bipod now useless, resting the rifle's handguard on a broken piece of concrete. She took a breath. Her grandfather had taught her about the rhythm of shooting the Leia. It was like music. Each shot a note, each pause a rest. The sequence had to flow. The machine gunner was in the lead. She placed the reticle ahead of him, on a piece of ground he had not yet reached. She exhaled and squeezed the trigger as his chest entered the crosshairs. Crack. The gunner stumbled and fell, the heavy PKM clattering onto the stones. Before the other 4 could react to their comrade's fall, Anya was already on the next target. Her hand worked the bolt almost unconsciously, her eye never leaving the scope. She didn't need to see the first man hit the ground. She trusted the rifle. She trusted the math. The second man, the team leader, was shouting, turning to see what happened. Crack. He spun around, a dark hole appearing on his chest plate. He collapsed. The remaining 3 scattered, diving for cover. 1 went left, 2 went right. They were panicked. Predictable. She followed the man on the left. He was scrambling behind a low wall. His head and shoulders were exposed for a fraction of a second. Crack. His helmet flew off and he slumped forward. 2 left. They had reached the cover of a doorway, pressing themselves against the frame, blind firing their AK-47s in her general direction. Anya waited. Her patience was absolute. One of them peeked out, trying to locate her. It was a fatal error. Crack. The 4th man fell back into the doorway. The last man, terrified, threw his rifle down and bolted, running blindly back the way he had come. He was an easy target, but a fleeing man was not a threat. Anya let him go. She shifted her aim. Crack. Her fifth shot wasn't for him. It was for the engine block of a technical pickup truck parked at the end of the alley, a vehicle armed with a heavy DSHK machine gun that was just waiting to join the fight. The 762mm round punched through the grille, and a plume of steam and oil erupted from under the hood. The vehicle was disabled. 5 shots. Less than 10 seconds. An entire enemy assault team and their heavy weapon support neutralized. The alley fell silent. On the street, the members of 1st Platoon, who had a clear view of the alley, stared in stunned disbelief. They had seen the enemy team advance, and then, in a series of swift, brutal moments, they had watched it get erased by an invisible hand. First Sergeant Riggs lowered his binoculars, his knuckles white. He had never seen shooting like that. Not in 20 years of service. It wasn't just skill. It was artistry. The effect of the 5 shots was immediate and catastrophic for the enemy's morale. The methodical elimination of their flanking team, coupled with the earlier loss of their sniper, broke their will to fight. What had been a disciplined ambush devolved into a panicked, disorganized retreat. Insurgents began abandoning their positions, firing wildly as they fell back, their only thought being escape. This was the critical moment, the turning point. Anya knew it wasn't enough to simply win the firefight. She had to dismantle their ability to reconstitute and attack again. She became the shepherd of their retreat, using the M110 not just to kill, but to control the battlefield. A machine gun nest that was still laying down sporadic fire from the eastern building became her next focus. She didn't aim for the gunner. She aimed for the heavy, green ammunition sitting beside the gun. The round pierced the thin metal, and the box erupted as the belt of ammunition inside cooked off in a spectacular, terrifying chain reaction of fire and explosions. The machine gun fell silent. 2 insurgents tried to make a run for a vehicle parked behind the mosque. Anya didn't shoot them. She fired a single, precise round that struck the front tire of the truck, which hissed and sagged to the ground, immobilizing it. Another group was attempting to set up a hasty mortar position in a courtyard. A round from Anya's rifle impacted the mortar tube itself, the clang of metal on metal audible even from a distance, knocking it from its baseplate and rendering it useless. She was a ghost, a phantom presence that anticipated their every move and methodically stripped them of their weapons and mobility. Each shot was a carefully chosen move on a violent chessboard. She wasn't just a sniper. She was a battle manager, directing the flow of the enemy's collapse from her unseen perch. Her actions created the window the platoon desperately needed. The incoming fire dwindled from a torrent to a trickle, and then to nothing. "First squad on me. We're moving up," Riggs roared, his voice filled with a new, fierce confidence. "Second squad. Cover. Evans, you're with me. We're getting Miller and Davies." The platoon surged forward, no longer pinned, no longer victims. They moved with purpose, clearing the buildings from which they had been fired upon, the enemy having already fled. They found the machine gun nests abandoned, the weapons left behind in the haste to escape. PFC Evans, moving with Riggs, kept glancing up at the ruined building. He couldn't reconcile the quiet, reserved medic he knew with the terrifyingly efficient killer who had just saved them all. It was like discovering your librarian was secretly a god of war. They reached the casualties. Miller was weak but conscious. Davies was gritting his teeth in pain, but he was alive. The exfiltration helicopter, which had been holding off due to the intense ground fire, was finally cleared to approach. The battle for the market square, which had been on the verge of becoming a massacre, was over. And it had been won by a single soldier with 1 rifle who was not supposed to be a shooter. High above the chaos, Anya watched them. She tracked the last of the fleeing enemy fighters until they disappeared into the labyrinthine streets of the city. Her work was done. The rifle was still warm against her cheek. The smell of burnt powder hung in the air around her. She had not spoken a word, had not received a single order. She had simply seen what needed to be done, and she had done it. The dust began to settle, both literally and figuratively. The crackle of gunfire was replaced by the shouts of squad leaders organizing a perimeter and the distant, rhythmic whump 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 of the incoming medevac chopper. Kilo companies secured the square, their initial shock and awe slowly giving way to a profound curiosity. Whispers spread through the platoon. Who made those shots? Was it air support? Was it some classified asset nobody told them about? No one considered the medic. As the wounded were being loaded onto the helicopter, First Sergeant Riggs looked up at the ruined building. He had to know. Evans, stay with the platoon. Secure this position. I'll be back, he ordered, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. He walked toward the building, his M4 held at a low ready, picking his way through the rubble. He entered the shattered structure and began to climb, his boots crunching on loose concrete. The destruction was even worse up close. He saw the pockmarks from the machine gun fire, the gaping hole from the RPG. He couldn't imagine anyone surviving that onslaught. He reached the third floor and paused. Sergeant Anya Sharma was standing there, silhouetted against the open sky. The M110 was slung over her shoulder, muzzle pointed safely at the floor. She was checking her medical pack, her hands moving with the same calm precision she had displayed on the battlefield, as if she were simply taking inventory after a routine drill. She looked up as Riggs approached, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind whistled through the ruined building, the only sound between them. Riggs's eyes went from her face to the rifle, then back to her face. He saw the faint traces of dust and cordite on her cheek. He saw the utter lack of arrogance in her eyes. There was no "I told you so," no hint of triumph. There was only a quiet, stoic professionalism. He had mocked her. He had dismissed her. He had nearly gotten them all killed with his pride. She had saved them, not with bandages and gauze, but with a skill he had never witnessed before. He opened his mouth to say something. An apology, an explanation, a question, but the words wouldn't come. They felt cheap, inadequate. Instead, he did the only thing that felt right. He slowly, deliberately, extended his hand. "Sharma," he said. The single word was freighted with meaning. It was an acknowledgement, an apology, a mark of profound, hard-won respect. Anya looked at his outstretched hand for a second before taking it. Her grip was firm. "First Sergeant," she replied, her voice even. They shook hands once, a brief, solid connection. Nothing more needed to be said. Miles away, in the air-conditioned quiet of the Tactical Operations Center, the colonel stared at the name that had finally come up on the screen. Sergeant Anya Sharma. Combat medic, he read the file notes, his eyebrows climbing higher with each line. Extensive small arms qualifications, all expert. Recipient of the prestigious McQueen Sniper Competition Award during a Joint Forces training exercise 3 years prior. And a single, redacted line in her family history section. He turned to the intelligence officer. "Get me her full file." "Unredact that line," the officer typed for a moment, his security clearance granting him access. He looked up, his eyes wide. "Sir," he said, his voice hushed. Her grandfather was Subedar Jit Bahadur Thapa of the British Gurkha Rifles. He served in the Falklands. His call sign. It was Guile, the Spectre. The colonel leaned back in his chair, looking at the drone feed where the tiny figure of Sergeant Sharma was now descending from the building. He nodded slowly, a deep understanding dawning on him. Lineage. Some things were simply in the blood. Back at the forward operating base, the oppressive heat of the day finally began to yield to the cool of the evening. The sky was a bruised purple, streaked with orange. The debrief had been a surreal affair. First Sergeant Riggs had given a dry, factual account of events, his report noteworthy only for what it omitted any mention of his own dismissiveness. He simply stated that when Corporal Davies was wounded, Sergeant Sharma had assumed the role of designated marksman and effectively neutralized multiple enemy threats, enabling the platoon to regain the initiative. It was a sterile, official summary of a miracle. Anya sat on a crate outside the medical tent, the M110 rifle broken down on a cleaning mat in front of her. She had already tended to the other minor injuries in the platoon, cuts, scrapes, bruises, and had checked in on the status of Miller and Davies, who were now stable and en route to a hospital in Germany. Now it was time for the rifle. She worked under the dim glow of a single bulb, her hands moving with a lover's care. The scent of carbon solvent and gun oil filled the air, a smell she found more comforting than perfume. Each piece was wiped down, inspected, and lubricated. The bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the bore snake pulled through the barrel until it came out clean. This was part of the ritual her grandfather had taught her. "You must care for the weapon as you care for your own body," he'd said, his weathered hands demonstrating on his own rifle. "It is not a tool of anger. It is an instrument of focus. Its purpose is not to create noise, but to create silence. Respect it, and it will be true." Corporal Davies, his arm now in a clean sling, walked over and stood silently, watching her. He was a good marksman, one of the best in the battalion, but he knew he could not have made those shots. Not the first one into the wind at that range, and certainly not the sequence of 5 in the alley. He felt no professional jealousy, only a deep, humbling sense of awe. Anya finished reassembling the rifle, the parts clicking together with satisfying precision. She worked the charging handle, did a function check, and then laid the weapon gently back on the mat. Davies reached out, not to touch the rifle, but to lightly tap the small, woven rhododendron charm still tied to the sling. "My grandmother used to grow those," he said softly. In her garden back in Oregon. Anya looked up, a faint, rare smile touching her lips. "My grandfather said they only grow where the air is pure and the spirit is strong." Davies nodded. Understanding this was all the explanation he would ever get, or ever need. He gave her a simple, grateful nod and walked away. The final image of the day was of Anya, alone. The M110 was clean, its deadly work done. Her medical pack was restocked, its life-saving work ready to begin again. She sat in the gathering darkness, the silence of the desert replacing the silence she had imposed on the battlefield. The wind picked up, a gentle breeze that carried the scent of distant sand and the low hum of the base generators. It rustled the dried flowers on the rifle sling, a quiet song only she could hear. Her competence had been questioned, her purpose dismissed. But in the end, the rifle had spoken the truth, and the world had been forced to listen. Dignity, she knew, was not something given. It was earned, and it was always earned in silence.